Here's something weird to add to the list of things that didn't make sense in 2020. It turns out that for some time now, the Earth itself has been slowing down, like literally, in its rate of rotation on its axis, to the extent that every so often they have to add a leap second to the year just to equally slow down our calendar. And then along comes 2020, and surprise, surprise, which is to say, no surprise, because 2020 rendered surprises obsolete. The Earth decided to speed up. And if it continues at this rate, we may have to subtract a second from the calendar, lest the Earth get to the end of the year before we do. What does any of this mean, you ask me, as if I know everything, as if you are really asking, as if I could hear you even if you were, as if this isn't just me asking myself whether anything means anything anymore. I don't know, other than that it seems that we should stop saying that time flies when you're having fun. I know that I am not alone in saying that you are not alone in feeling alone, if alone is indeed what you are feeling. There has recently been an uptick in the amount of shout-outs, cries for help on my various Facebook and social media feeds. People claiming to be frustrated, angry, enraged, or equally feeling depressed, lethargic, just feeling that they are at the end of their rope. And at the same time, there's also been an uptick in the amount of people posting sort of in a general way, like messages of support, saying like, you, plural, anonymous, you, hold on, I've got you, your plural, back. I am sending you, plural, whoever you are, a virtual hug, which means not much to me personally, since they don't know what I'm going through. And I think we've all agreed that hugs need, at this point, consent. But I get it. These are confusing times. I mean, as of today, I hardly need to point out, we have hit the milestone of 400,000 people have died of this coronavirus. More people are contracting it every single day. More people than ever are dying of it in the United States. A new variant has come along, making it even more contagious than ever before. They say that by the end of February, 500,000, 500,000 people will have died of this. And at the same time, though, suddenly, yay, there's a vaccine. It's all over. It's okay. There's multiple vaccines. Though I have to say, if this is hope, it's awfully dark and cold. Or maybe that's just me sitting out here in the middle of January at 9 p.m. at the most far eastern point of the United States. Not really the most far eastern point, but the other most far eastern points are all locked to the continent itself. I am here, the tip of the spear of the island called Long, the Atlantic surrounding our hamlet on three sides, meaning the wind can really work itself up as it rolls across from Europe before it crashes on our shores with all the enthusiasm of a battleship filled with Navy boys descending upon a town during Fleet Week. But much more creepy than Navy boys, because Navy boys do not whistle their way through the imperfections of your window frames as the wind does, turning your abode into some sort of pan flute that just accentuates the isolation, which we are all feeling in spades already. But of course, they're telling us we have to be even more socially distant than we have been already, which means, no surprise, even the crickets have left my side. Crickets, which had been here since I started doing this show in August. crickets who love to make a mockery of every performer who is performing to no one. But now that they're not here, I miss them. And I'm left alone with just a wind chime that occasionally chimes. I could take it down, but I figured, no, let's leave it up there just in case the wind wants to say something during this show. It has the vehicle now to do so. I'm left here alone with the idea of you there. I can't see you. I don't know if or how many people may or may not be watching this. I don't check that kind of thing until much later. And so I just believe to myself that there's at least one person out there, that I'm talking to you, and that you are here with me, and what is, to me anyway, the very physical presence of my breath in this chilled air. Breath that at once makes clear to me that I am at least alive, but that I am quite literally running out of steam. I think the prevailing emotion in the United States, at least, it's hard to put into words. It's a sense of overarching failure. And if you disagree with that assessment, then let's chalk that up to yet another failure of my own to adequately describe the prevailing feeling here. Obviously, there's failure on a grand scale with an administration that has thrown up its arms in defeat at the feet and the hands of this coronavirus. There's a failure as a society in general that has made a political fight over masks of all things in combating this coronavirus. But those are easy failures. They're in the news, the headlines every day. I'm talking about failures of a much more personal level that we all have to contend with alone by ourselves. I'm talking about the failure of not getting more done during 10 months of isolation. I'm talking about the failure of not communicating with friends and family more often on Zoom. I'm talking about the failure to not have done more chores or more house projects around, to not have completed more puzzles, to have not read a single book. I'm talking to you, by which I mean to me. Failure to have not watched more movies, failure to have not had your kids spend more time with your parents, their grandparents, failure to have not figured out Zoom better, failure to have not gotten a virtual background that you really feel comfortable with, failure to have not put more of your creativity online, failure to have not watched other people's creative endeavors online, even as you beseech them to watch your own, failure to have not invested in the right stocks in companies which now it seems so obvious they were going to do well, failure to have not had the means to earn money to theoretically invest in those companies which so obviously you can see now we're going to do well during a pandemic. Our lives are all pockmarked with silent yet psychically percussive, embarrassing failures that none of us are inclined to revisit because, of course, embarrassment is just your own projection of what you think other people are thinking of you. And so why give other people ammunition when discussing your failures? And yet it seems that our country has hit a point where we need to reckon with how failure affects the mental state, with how it affects our decision making, particularly when we are talking about the person who is our commander in chief, the man who will be president for only 15 more hours. 15 more hours he will remain what some call the most powerful person on the planet. For 15 more hours he will be in charge of the largest economy, of the biggest army, of the blah and the blah and the blah. And then come noon o'clock tomorrow, all of that will be stripped away from him, and he will be demoted to our status, which is not to denigrate our status, but it's just to make clear that come noon tomorrow, we all will be much unchanged, while he, I think it's not controversial to say, will officially be the biggest loser on the planet. planet. There's some who might say he already is the biggest loser on the planet, but I'm not here to denigrate anyone at all. And who amongst us can really say how we would behave if we knew that soon we were going to be considered such a huge loser? Who knows what sort of irrational, angry behavior we would exhibit, And those who do know, they're very, very quiet about it again because nobody wants to talk about their own failures. And yet desperate times seem to call for desperate admissions. I've looked around for someone to step forward and talk in an honest way about their own experiences with being such a loser. And maybe it's because of social distancing, but there's no one here with me to step forward. And so that responsibility now falls squarely upon myself, because I have had that experience with being the biggest loser in all the land. And you know what they say: once a biggest loser, always a biggest loser. And if they don't say that, I just said it right now. And you, going forward, can say that they say that, thinking of me having just said that. It's a very small fraternity of people on this planet who have had experience with being the biggest loser in all the land. There's Donald Trump. There's me. That might be it. It's not a fraternity that I ever wanted to be a part of. The fraternity that I did want to join, I actually submitted a bid during my freshman year of college to join their ranks, an application that was duly voted on via a secret ballot by the fraternity in a sort of election, the results of which were delivered to me by 3 prospective fraternity brothers who stood outside in the hallway of my freshman dorm, and across the threshold to me inside my little tiny freshman dorm room delivered the news that my application to join their ranks had been denied, that my services as a fraternity member, as a prospective friend, as a brother, as a fellow in their fellowship would not be needed. They said, sorry. I said something surely designed to make them not feel so bad. And then they left, which I would have done as well had I not already been at home, in a room now by myself, drowning in that acidic liquid that courses through our blood and which we call humiliation. And I know there's some of you out there that are like, really? You are comparing the humiliation of losing the presidency of the United States of America with you not being accepted into a fraternity in college? Oh, please. But to you, I would say embarrassment is in the heart of the beholder. We must remember that our president, Donald Trump, was basically applying for an extension of his job. It was a job application. Many people don't have their jobs extended, and his denial of his extension, he could at least walk away knowing that more than 74 million people really wanted him to keep doing this job, which is 74 million more people than wanted me to be in this fraternity. This fraternity that was composed of 100 people, my peers, young men between the ages of 18 and 21, who got together, voted, and spoke with a single voice, saying, no, we do not want to be your friend. It was the original denial of a friend request. And there are others of you, I know, who will be like, well, they did you a blessing, Billy, because fraternities, right? They not only attract the worst kind of man, but they then bring out the worst kind of trait in the worst kind of man. But to you, I would say, have you never thought this exact same thing of people in politics? And if so, does that not make the parallels between my situation and our president's all the greater? And to be clear, I do not think this of people who are in fraternities. If I did, I would not have submitted a bid to join one. My whole experience with fraternities is purely based on where I went to school in the late 1980s. Kenyon College in the very middle of Ohio, a school of merely 1,600 students. The closest town in any direction was called Gambier, and it was so small that it was dwarfed by Kenyon College, which I'll just reiterate had a student population of 1,600 people. Gambier was 1 block long in the middle of the campus, which is to say, if you did not enjoy the activities on campus, well, there was no off campus. And so fraternities, they had this very necessary service of being a sort of engine of community. It was a way for people to get together, to pool their money, to buy kegs of beer and throw parties that everyone on campus was invited to. There were no guest lists. There was no one at any door at any party. Every single weekend night was just people saying, what fraternity party are you going to tonight? And more specifically, in my instance, I was just sort of curious and excited, intrigued at this idea of joining a sort of a tribe of people, a community that not only had secrets, but had traditions. And I never in my life have cared about traditions whatsoever. And I was very curious to know about an organization that had been passing down traditions generation after generation in an accelerated form, because these were generations that were just 4 years long, traditions passed down by young men who are of an age where traditionally they do not care about traditions. And this fraternity, Delta Phi, had about 100 members in its group, which is to say, at a school of 1,600 co-ed students, means that they accepted seemingly everyone. And I looked at myself in the mirror before applying, and I thought, you're part of everyone. You seem to fit the bill for what they're looking for. And so I was shocked. And I can speak about it now with a certain, ease, maybe even a bit of humor. But at the time, I not only told everybody that, yeah, I'm joining that fraternity, I told myself that was like the route I was going to be on, I was going to have this social life, which is a big deal for anybody who's arriving in a new situation, as I was as a freshman at a school where I knew nobody, just as every other freshman knew anybody either, And if I'd had an opportunity to stand up in front of the fraternity before they made their voting me down, I would have made a speech where I would have said to them, the reason that you don't know me, the reason you never saw me at any of your rush events, any of your get-to-know-us soirees, is because my would-be brothers, have been in training. And they all would have huddled closer. Training, it's a dog whistle for boys. And they would have been like, training for what? And I said, for what do you think, my would-be friends? For being a sports hero. And would you not want someone like myself bringing you sports glory over the next 4 years of my Kenyon college career? And they would have lifted me up in celebration as if I'd already won the golden cup of whatever. As I would have been saying to them, but understand, I do not want to be a sports hero out of a sense of ego. No, I am merely fulfilling the reason that anybody should go to a small liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere, is because I strongly believe that we should all be here to try something new. And Sports Hero certainly fell into that category. Being an athlete, that would have been something entirely new. Sure, I'd done athletics. I mean, every boy must, right? But for me, the problem was I'm not good at sports. You know what I mean? Which is difficult enough for any boy, particularly, but even worse when like you are taller than your fellow boys, and every male friend of your parents feels obligated to ask you every time they see you, as if it's the first time, hey, how's basketball coming along? And you have to remind them, as you do every time, that you do not play basketball. And every time they will ask, why not? You're so tall. And you have to tell them, is there ever any other reason than I am not good at it? Baseball, that's what I played. Baseball, that was my sport. I loved baseball. I wish there were people that could have done a study of me at the time. I don't know what the field of study would have been, but I feel like I would have been an interesting subject, because you very rarely find someone like me who loves a sport, who plays a sport, and yet who's terrible at the sport. And I knew I was terrible. I was embarrassing myself left, right, and center. You know what I mean? If you ever went to a baseball game and you wondered to yourself, where's Dockery? Everyone would be like, you see out there? Like way out there. You know what I mean? Like deep. So far deep, right field. That was my domain. I loved it out there, you know, because nobody ever hit the ball out there. The grass was no more green, no more lush than it was in right field, because it was never damaged by anyone running roughshod over it, fielding a ball. I would go out there, plant my feet in that lush growth, and over the course of the game, I would become intimately familiar with all the dandelions arrayed around me as I would engage in my own private game, even as the larger game of baseball was being played around me. That game being whether I could make it through each inning without ever moving my feet. Which I know some of you are like, well, that's gotta be pretty easy when no one hits the ball out to right field. But friends, for a sport that is much criticized for not having anything ever happening in it, I would ask you to look around at the field. You'll notice there's people constantly on the move out there. People shifting their positions closer and further away from the batter. People anticipating they think what's going to go on. People shifting left to right on the infield. The batter themselves in and out of the batter's box, using their bat to knock the dirt out of their cleats. The pitcher wandering aimlessly around the mound as if they were some ADHD student having to listen to a substitute teacher. There's a lot of temptation to join in on that and shift yourself around as if to signal to the rest of the team that you know what's going on. So it takes a steely resolve, a certain stubbornness to be like, now, I'm planted right here, you know? And eventually, of course, the inning would end and our team would get up to bat, and it'd be great if we did well, but if we did too well, you know, I'd start getting a little bit anxious, because negligible as my weight might seem, and if you think like, oh, I look like a bulked up guy, I want you to understand, I've got this on, I've got this on, I've got this on, I've got that on, I've got this on, I've got, if you've lost count, so have I, all right? But standing on grass over a certain period of time, it's going to have an effect. It's going to press the grass down to the ground. And the longer the innings would go on where we do well, the more I'd be starting getting anxious that perhaps the grass, you know, was going to be able to fully stand itself back up, which would mean by the time I got back out to right field, I wouldn't know where I'd been standing. And my whole game would be shot. Luckily, my own ability at the plate helped with that situation. As time after time I would strike out, which was not something I wanted to do, which was humiliating every single time. But at least as I ran back out to right field, I could think to myself, well, maybe I'll at least be able to find where I'd been standing. perhaps my career would have continued on, uninterrupted. There was never much competition for playing right field. Perhaps I would be in the majors right now, just sort of unnoticed by anyone, not on a good team. No, not doing well. Come on, no. But certainly making more money than I am right now, but that dream was shot once I hit high school. And then there were these things called tryouts. No matter how hard I tried, I always got out. So that was that. Switched over and tried my hand at soccer. That sentence alone should tell you how that went. Halfway through my high school career, I switched over to tackle football because I wanted to know what it was like to wear all those pads. I was like, you put on the pads, you're big, you know what I mean? Like your shoulders are broad and scalloped. And it turns out I did like wearing all those pads. I was right. I thought I would, and I did. You know what I mean? And it's nice. You're big. You're bulked up. I was like, I've never been big. I remember halfway through my 2-year football career, I asked my father. I said, Dad, I'm thinking I'd love to start eating supplements. I wanted to get like a big vat of powder and make myself shakes. And my dad was like, No. And he was right. I'm glad he said no, because, the truth is, being terrible at football when you're as skinny as a rail, nobody blames you. Everyone's like, yeah, of course, but if I bulked up and got somehow muscular and big, if that was even possible, then it would have been the whole situation I've been facing with basketball, where everyone would have assumed I was good and then seen me and been like, oh my God, this is just terribly embarrassing, And so high school ended and I was going off to college, and I thought, now's my chance to really, for the last time, try something I'd never tried before. And I'm going to Kenyon College in the middle of Ohio, 1,600 students. How good could they be at sports? And I say this knowing full well the strange fun fact, Kenyon College actually holds the record for most consecutive number 1 titles in any NCAA division, in any sport, anywhere in the country. But it's a sport that, they were good. I'm sure they were good, but it's swimming. I read about it in every alumni book that went out, every magazine. We were great at swimming. No, I never went to a swimming game. No one I knew at school ever went to a swimming game. It was like sort of swimming happened over here, and the rest of the school, now even the smaller population, when you take out the few people swimming, but percentage-wise it counts for something, And I was like, that's who I'm competing with, and I know that none of them are going to be very good at sports, because just the mascot that we had at Kenyon was a clear indication that we do not care about athletics. I'm going to tell you the mascot, and I'm going to challenge you to tell me whether you had a worse mascot. I'm not going to hear from you because you didn't. We had 2, one for the men, one for the women. The women, the women's was? What the women's mascot? It was ladies. Just another word for what they already were, but one that suggests they're more prim, they're more proper, they're competing in petticoats, that when they run down the field, they've got an imaginary book on their head, so they're gliding, that whenever they're done with whatever competition they're competing in, it's not about whether they win or lose, it's about getting checked afterwards to see whether there are any pearls of perspiration, because everybody knows that ladies do not sweat. The man, we had a worse mascot, really hard to rally behind. The Lords. We were the Lords. Imagine that. You're on a team that's really not good, and you've called yourself something that's a synonym for gods. And of course, lords and ladies were supposed to evoke landed English gentry, which always inspires fear in your competitors on the athletic field. I went to some football games, and I attempted to cheer from the stands, but it's very difficult to yell, go Lords, to your team, because the other team, who may not be familiar with your mascot, they of course are going to hear it as Gaylords, and they're going to think you're yelling it at them, and you're going to be like, no, I'm sorry, I'm yelling it at my own team, and they're going to be like, what kind of psychological game are they playing here, you know? And you know they're thinking that, and so you have to sort of yell, I'm saying go Lords, but anytime you have to preface your cheer with the two words, I'm saying, it really deflates the whole enthusiasm for the sport that you might have, and so it was in this milieu that I thought I just need to find a sport that requires no skill whatsoever, no eye-hand core, preferably something I already know how to, preferably something that requires no equipment, no investment of money. And then all of a sudden I was like, running. I have been running my whole life. Like, not competitively, you know what I mean? As I think I've made clear in baseball, but like late for a bus. Like, I know how to do. I didn't realize I was playing a sport in that situation. I'm not talking about track and field here, to be clear. You understand? I'm not talking about running like fast. I'm talking about long distance, cross country running. You know what I mean? And it seemed to me suddenly I had a plan where I could be the best, which was simply like, just don't stop running, right? You know what I mean? And if the course is long enough, it seemed to me that eventually everybody else would stop running, you know? Of course they would, because eventually they would get bored, because there is no sport more boring, and I'm including swimming in this, than running. And so with that, I joined the cross-country team, and I became a Kenyon Lord. And, you know, it was thrilling. Maybe there's a lesser word than thrilling, but it's in the family of thrilling to be on a team with like a coach who like is talking about running in a way that I didn't know. I remember he used the word anabolic at one point, and I was like, ooh, you know, I was like, this is for real. And to be in training was exciting. I mean, to an extent, because at the same time, this is right off the hop, arriving at Kenyon College, not knowing everybody, feeling that I'm missing out on the lifelong friends that everybody is making right now. All around me, people going out drinking, getting drunk, going to parties. You know, right off the bat, I can't because I'm training. I'm going to bed early while people are meeting their friends, meeting their wives, meeting the people with whom they will make their youthful mythologies, the people who later in life will hold their hands as they pass away on their deathbed, as I'm thinking, who will hold my hand, you know? And they're thinking like, no, it's okay. I'm in training. You know, I'm gonna be an athlete. It's okay. You know, but difficult, right? You know, until finally 2 weeks into my Kenyon career, 2 weeks. You know, it doesn't seem long, but it's ages when you just don't really know anybody, and you're focused on running. When finally we had our first intercollegiate meet, that exciting moment when you finally go in on a bus early on a Saturday morning, while everybody's working off their hangovers, and you've gotten together with your teammates, and you drive to some other school in some other part of Ohio where like 7 or 8 other colleges from other parts of Ohio are all convening here, and you all get out of your various vans, and you're sizing each other up, you know, and you're thinking, these are my people, you know, these are the people who have also been sacrificing over the past 2 weeks, who have been not making friends, who have been more dedicated to some higher purpose of their body, you know, and it's quite thrilling to walk and to realize we all have potential. You know, these are the people that I'm going to be running against for the next 4 years, and let's figure out like who amongst us will be the best. And there's lots of stretching going on. I don't even care about stretching. I was stretching like a champion. I was stretching parts of my body that I don't think you even need for running, just to intimidate the other teammates, just so that they might think, why aren't I stretching that part in the back of my shoulder, you know? And then a gun comes out, and it's at that point you realize, oh, this sport is the most dangerous sport. There's no other sport where a gun suddenly appears, and you're lining up with 50 other young men on a line as 50 members of the women's team are watching you, getting ready to run themselves after you, you know, and then the gun, goes off. And you feel a wind. You feel this electricity. You feel this enthusiasm for athletics lift you up and propel you forward. You feel electric, and you are running. I am running faster than I know that I should be, right? It's a 10-mile race, which may not sound like the longest race, but at the time, 10 miles, I'd never run 10 miles really in my life, and so it was a very long race indeed, and I should be pacing myself, but it suddenly seems to me as we're beginning this race that, maybe just adrenaline alone will carry me the entire way, that perhaps don't want to get ahead of myself. I might win. You know what I mean? And before too long, I downgrade that to perhaps I might end up at the front of group of the, and then I downgrade that not too long to I might end up in the first half, and then downgrade to I might end up in the second half, until eventually downgrade that to realizing I might be competing here for last place. And then that gets downgraded when everybody leaves me behind. Everybody. We're not running on a track. We're running on rural back roads. We're running through woods. We're running on farmland. We're in a rural part of rural Ohio. And it turns out that everybody is so much faster than me that within 1 mile of this 10-mile race, I literally can no longer see anyone. And to really break that down for you, I want you to understand that NCAA Division I, that's the sports that apply to the biggest universities who have the best athletes, and one imagines that the worst Division I runner is comparable in speed and ability to do the best Division II, the mid-sized schools, and that the worst Division II runner is probably comparable to the best Division III runner, and the worst Division III runner is comparable in speed and ability to no one, because there is no Division IV. And I knew I was not the best person on my team, but I had thought, I don't know what I thought. Now, running by myself, knowing that everyone is so far ahead that they will finish running this race, at which point it will no longer be a race, because I'll just be running alone against no one. And it's quite a thing to be running a race that if you stop competing in this sport for which you've been training, not only will no one care, no one will even know that you've stopped running, and it's a real test of one's sense of self to just be following these markers indicating a course and wrestling with your own sense of self-worth and wondering why you've chosen to pursue this particular course in life at this school where nobody, where you've had to go to bed just the night before a Friday night, and I'm in bed at 10 at nights while up and down the hallways outside my room I hear everybody cavorting. I hear people getting drunk. I hear laughter echoing all around me as I'm tossing and turning in a bed. And you might think, oh, it's so sad. You're all alone. And you know what? Turns out that would have actually been better than the reality, which was my roommate also went to bed at the same time I did, not because he was in training to be a sports hero, but because he just doesn't care about anyone, that he's a social misfit, is so not interested in making friends that, in fact, he has disdain, I think, for people who do have interest in making friends. There are professionals in the administrative office of Kenyon College who are paid salaries to collect all the various applications that us, the prospective students, have filled out, profiles about ourselves that they have promised to take and carefully consider, and then perfectly match us up with other students who are just like us so that we will live together for a year in harmony. And when they match you up with someone who is a social misfit, it necessitates you doing more self-examination than you would have been doing already. It really is difficult, you know? And I'm thinking as I'm running along, thinking how I didn't even get a good sleep because the fire alarm went off at 2 a.m. And I don't know if you perhaps grew up in a fire station, but me, I have had no experience with growing up with a fire alarm. I've never been woken by one in my life, and fire alarms are designed for one purpose, and that is making sure you get out of bed, preferably quickly, which means perhaps making you believe that you are already on fire, which indeed was how I woke up. Within a millisecond was at the door of our room, believing that we had micro moments left to save ourselves. A door handle that I found to be locked, granted from the inside, but growing up I had never encountered a locked door in my own home in my entire life. The only key I ever saw growing up was the key to our car, which we kept in the ignition in the driveway. You may ask, was the car ever stolen? The answer is yes, it was. One time we got the car back. Where did we keep the key thereafter? Right in the ignition in the driveway. You wonder, was the car ever stolen again? And the answer is no, it was not. Do with that information what you will. As sort of a case in point as to my roommate, just to give you a real good example of the kind of person he was, the kind of person who would lock our door as if afraid that the students are going to come in and steal something from us in our tiny room, where if indeed they come in, they would literally have to be like, excuse me, sorry, almost like climb over us. It was that small. Our beds were so close to each other. Before I got to Kenyon, I called up my prospective roommate, as one does, just to find out, is there anything we need to hash out, anything we need to talk about? Specifically, are you bringing a stereo? Should I bring a stereo? Stereos back then in the late 80s are not like stereos are now. You could go out jogging now with your entire stereo attached to your bicep with every song that has ever been recorded. If you wanted to do that back in the late 80s, you had to hire a team of Sherpas to carry your amplifier and your record player and your entire record collection, with one Sherpa just doling out an extension cord for the entire length of your run. We had no room in our room for such a system. The speakers alone back then, they were admired as much for their sound as they were for their wood grain. They were large boxes, which today would serve no purpose other than if you found yourself to be on some sort of ocean liner that hit an iceberg and sank, and your recent love of your life was clinging to the headboard of to not freeze in the ocean, and you would be upset if floating along was a small little iPad that you couldn't float on. You'd be like, if only this happened in the late 1980s, I might be able to climb aboard one of these speakers. which we would have had no room for in our room. And my roommate, he said, no, I'm going to bring a stereo. I said, that's great, because that means I don't have to go out to the woods, chop down a tree, and make a stereo myself. And yet, when I got to school, my roommate said to me, you can listen to the stereo, but you are never allowed to touch it, because if it breaks, I want to know it was my hand that caused it to break. So you can imagine how emasculating it is to have to ask someone who's the same age as you, 18 years old, if like, could you please press the power button on the amplifier? I'd like to listen to some music. Oh, could you turn the knob of the station for me, because I feel like I want to hear a different song. Ask them every time I want to put on a record, which I didn't do very often, because first of all, he was always in the room, antisocial as he was, always listening to his music, and he hated my taste in music, would roll his eyes every time I asked if I could put a record of mine on. And it's no fun listening to music when you know other people in the room hate your taste in music. And so that frustration against him came out when I came to that door that he had locked from the inside. I was like, ah! And I was like, why did you lock the door? We're gonna die. And at that point, of course, he's jumped up from the bed and he's working to undo the lock. And I have a moment to step back from the door, a moment to look down at myself. And it's a strange moment to actually have your first moment of fashion consciousness, as I noticed that what I was wearing was not appealing. I was wearing nothing except for a pair of white briefs, what some might call tighty whities, if mine had been particularly tight, but they were saggy because basically I'd been wearing these diapers made out of cotton ever since I stopped wearing actual diapers. And the reason I wore this kind of underwear, had been wearing it my entire life, is because, added to my social misery, I never had a girlfriend up to this point, never had someone to look at me naked and say, this is not a good look, we're getting you some boxers. And then all of a sudden, the door is thrown open. A shaft of light lays itself down upon the industrial carpeting of our freshman dorm. And without another thought, my roommate and I are out the door, sprinting down the hallway, which is only 10 feet, to the front door of the building, which we burst out of into the chill of the mid-September night air in Ohio. The two of us, hands on our knees, panting, but so happy to be alive, to have a second chance at life. And sad, of course, that apparently everybody else had perished in the dorm, or so one would have to assume, seeing as how there was nobody else out here with us. The two of us standing alone, and there was a glass-encased stairwell that ran up the outside of the building, and we watched as very slowly people were making their way out of the various floors, winding their way down the stairwell in a manner much less panicked than my roommate and myself. People that were dressed in sweatpants, who had taken the time to put on some clothes, or who were still wearing what they'd worn for their entire Friday. This was still their Friday night. They had their arms draped around new friends, around new love interests. They were laughing, and as all drunk, laughing people are, always looking for new things to laugh at. And you would see their expressions as they would walk out of the dorm, and see my roommate and I standing there. It's an expression. It's very, I can't reproduce the expression. I think it has to come naturally. What you need to honestly just suddenly see a person like myself, skinny, pale, standing there in sagging, otherwise tidy whitey's diapers made out of cotton, let's call them what they are. Someone who's obviously literally having the nightmare we all have of suddenly being at school in your underwear. What's different in this instance is that I am standing next to someone who is dressed identical to me. My roommate, also tall, pale, and dressed in sagging, tidy whiteys, and everyone's expression surprised to see someone's nightmare realized, but additionally surprised to see that person standing next to someone having the exact same nightmare. And our friend Kurt finally making it out. Kurt, who, we'd become acquaintances with, and he, expressed an appropriate reaction when he saw us, which was he laughed, at us. And I was like, Kurt, I was like, we can't stand here, because it certainly seemed to me that my entire social reputation, frayed and ill-formed as it was about to be stamped solidly for the next 4 years. And Kurt was like, absolutely, we have to get you out of here. And so we walked to a nearby building, a cafeteria that had a lobby that was open 24 hours. And Kurt brought us into the lobby and was like, you guys wait here. I'll come back and get you when the coast is clear. And my roommate and I were now standing beneath the neon lights. Dressed as we were, it suddenly seemed that should someone come upon us, this would be even worse, because now there was no explanation of a hasty exit due to a fire alarm. Which I should say, the building was never on fire, just someone pulled the alarm. Everyone else seemed to know that. And so my roommate and I retreated to the men's room to hide there. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where every step you're making, it seems to make the situation worse, because we know that should someone come in the men's room, I mean, we could offer an explanation as to what happened, but it certainly would seem like we were protesting a bit too much. And so we just sort of were anxious and nervous that someone might walk in, unsure of where to retreat to. And when finally someone did walk in, it was Kurt, luckily, who laughed with us, bringing us back to the dorm. And it felt good to laugh, to own up to the absurdity of the situation, to just admit that, yeah, maybe we acted a little hastily, a little foolishly, as we fled that room that was not only the closest room to the exit, but was on the first floor. There was a window. You wouldn't even have to jump out of the window. You could literally just step out the window onto the ground. You know what I mean? And I'm thinking about all this as I'm running, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what, maybe that's how you deal with failed situations. Maybe you laugh at them. Maybe you own them up. And I'm about to run across this very large field, and there's the finish line is far off on the end, and I'm thinking it's going to be an embarrassing last run, because everyone certainly is finished by now. I can't see anybody else running, and they're going to just be watching me, a solitary figure, still trundling across this field. And it's going to be very sad and very pathetic, but I tell myself, hold your head up high. You know what I mean? It's okay. Just own this moment of failure. And I'm really sort of like working my way up to that when I sort of hear something over my shoulder, and I look back behind me to the beginning of the field where I had just been running, and I see the worst thing that I could have seen, which was a wall of women running towards the same finish line that I am also running to. And the thing is this, is that the women started their race after the men, so that the record keepers would not get confused by the men and women perhaps finishing at the same time. And I was like, oh no, because they're running very fast. They've all been running for like their lives. They've been running through high school. They haven't just taken this up like 10 days ago. And I'm like, it's one thing as a boy to lose to every other boy in every other part of Ohio, but it's another thing not just to lose to all the women, ladies, if you go to Kenyon, but losing to women who've given you an enormous head start. And so I dig deep, and I'm like, not today. And though I know it'll look ridiculous, I have to try and hold on to some shred of pride, if there even really is any pride at all. And I just dig deep and I just start sprinting, and I keep looking back over my shoulder and they're getting closer and closer. I'm making all those sounds that runners make, this sort of, and then sweat is just pouring off at me. And I'm like, I don't care how stupid this looks to just be trying to run my heart out as these women are getting closer and closer, realizing that this is some sort of like perverse story that you might read about someone who finds a bottle in which there's a genie on a beach, and you wish, because you've never had a girlfriend, to be pursued by so many women. And of course, be careful what you wish for, because now there's a wall of them getting ever closer to me, and that finish line just approaching faster, and me sprinting, and then we get right to the end, and I dip my head forward, and I win. I mean, I didn't win. We all know I didn't win, but I at least did not lose. You know what I mean? I at least did not lose. Like I saw that as low as I felt, there was a bottom, and I did not reach it. And I don't want to look anybody in the eye, because I know it's stupid, but I'm panting. I've got my hands on my hips. I'm grabbing like the paper cups of water, splashing them on my face, you know what I mean, like athletes do. I'm looking up at the sky, like sucking in the air, But of course, as I'm wandering around, I'm also noticing, much the same as I noticed just 12 hours earlier, standing outside that dorm room at that non-existent fire, that there's not really many other people around me. Certainly there are no men at all, until I look across the field that I just run across and see at the far end a wall of men now racing across that field towards the same finish line I just passed over, as I suddenly put 2 and 2 together, and I forgot. I was like, oh no, not only did the women start after the men, but they ran a course that was half the distance, and apparently I just gotten lost. And I'm like, oh no, like accidentally I ran the women's race, but I'm thinking, what was everyone thinking to themselves watching that scene at the end, just being like, is he one of the Kenyon ladies? Did they have, is he, when is their team co-ed but just one guy? Like, is that okay? Is that official? Either that, they're thinking, or I'm trying to pull one over on everybody. I'm trying to make it seem like, no, I beat all the boys. I'm that much faster. But it's a testament to how bad I was as an athlete, that no one suspected me of foul play. No one accused me of cheating at all. All the boys finished are like, you first, you second, you third. Nobody, everybody just came up to me, and they're just like, so what happened? And I'm thinking like, well, what do I say? Do I say it was the course poorly marked? This whole thing was rigged. You know what I mean? It's not my fault. Or do I just say what I said, which was, I ran the women's race by accident. Which, of course, everyone found very funny, very funny, very funny. Oh, it's hilarious, I did not quit cross country. I just want you to know that. I continued running for the entire rest of the semester. Every sports story has the protagonist starting at a disadvantaged position, and through a series of workout montages, he gets better as a moment of victory in some form or another towards. I want you to know that's not this story. I never did better than absolutely last in every single race that I ran for that entire semester. And then every single Saturday was an exercise in indulging in and swallowing failure. And you might wonder why, and it's not that I could have put it into words at the time, right? But there was a feeling inside of me that, like, there is some power in owning failure, exquisite failure, particularly when you're playing on a team where your failure does not actually affect anyone else on the team. I found that I was a laughingstock. Like, literally, I'm not even making that up. Like, every week, our coach would have a long run for us, and he would put up on the board the course that we were all supposed to run, and then underneath on like a torn off piece of paper, he would draw Martin's course, and it would always be this like absurd course you could run, like where like you would end up in places you'd never go running, you know, like the equivalent of like the showroom of IKEA, you know, that kind of thing. And the truth was, I found it quite funny. The truth is that as the semester went on, I found I had a place on the team that if I'd merely been mediocre, I wouldn't have had. I was the comic relief. I was someone who others, I'll say, were in some kind of awe of. Of course, I couldn't ask them this, couldn't really check in it, but I have to believe that they saw in me a legend in the making, someone who was failing in ways they didn't even know one could, someone who was sticking to failing in extravagant style and fashion. And of course, out of this repeated exercise in failure, I felt something blooming inside of me, which again, at the time, I couldn't have put a word to, but which I would now call empathy, understanding of what it feels like to fail again and again and again, and to feel that when you own up to it, that completely determines how other people will regard you, which is not to say failure is any easier for me now, but there is at least an understanding I have of people who are not succeeding, people who want to be part of a group, who want to be part of a tribe, as I felt that I was with this cross-country team, the members of which I never became good friends with, but who I felt in a way I'd never felt on any sports team in my life, respected me, not for my athletic ability, but for something we might call character. I don't know. It's a weird sort of character, but I could feel, you know, people just like being like, well, you're an interesting person, you know? A month later, after this first race, was when I was rejected by the fraternity. And again, just because I was used to failure didn't make that rejection any easier whatsoever. But the day after my application had been denied, there was a knock on my freshman dorm door, and I opened it, and there were 3 members of my cross-country team, 3 teammates, upperclassmen, who I was surprised to see. I didn't even know they knew where I lived, and it just so happened they were also members of the fraternity I'd applied to. I say just so happens, not just so happens. They were the reason I'd applied to the fraternity. I hadn't been able to go to any of the rush functions of that fraternity because I'd been training, and I knew the 3 of them, and I thought they seemed like nice guys, you know, and so I applied to the fraternity they were a part of, and they were there to let me know that they were upset that I'd been rejected by the fraternity. And I was bowled over, really, that like, I was like, oh, wow. I was like, they were like, yeah. They were like, you know why you were rejected, right? And I said, well, because I didn't go to any rush functions because no one knows me. They were like, exactly. Nobody knows you, and you're a good guy. You're the kind of guy who should be in our fraternity. And I was really touched by that. And I was like, wow. I was like, thank you. And the truth is, I don't know, if I had not stuck with the cross country, if I had not failed so spectacularly, if I had not created some sort of affinity between myself and them and the other members of the team, you know, this moment wouldn't be happening. This moment of grace, this moment of feeling upperclassmen, people who seemed like men to me, seeing something in me, freshmen, you know, arriving at this school where I knew nobody, as everybody knows nobody. And they said, so we want you to appeal your rejection. And I was like, what appeal? I was like, what do you mean? Like I applied, they say no, then I say please, and then maybe they say no again. I was like, that seems really embarrassing. And they were like, yeah, but you know what? We're going to stand up before the next election of people who are appealing to really make a case for you. Would you let us do that? And I said, okay, sure, okay, all right, really being like, oh my God, like this is gonna be terrible. And 3 days later, there was a vote on my appeal, and I got in. And where I was a pledge for the rest of that freshman year, which meant every week I had to go to some pledge function and had whatever you do, and like people, I don't know if they knew I'd been rejected initially. No one acted like they knew. I certainly didn't act like I hadn't been or I had been, and I had a good time. And by the time I was a senior, I actually was vice president of the fraternity, and I was in charge of what we call Hell Week, which is the final week of the pledges all wanting to be a member of the fraternity. And it's a week in which they live with the fraternity, and you make life hard on them, right? And I was in charge of making life hard on them, but I was always very mindful that the pledges, should be in on the joke, so to speak, that they should know that even as we're making it hard on them, really, this is all in good fun. And if they are not laughing too, then like this is a failure for everyone in a way that hopefully we would own up to. And I believe it was successful, and I believe it was good. And it's this empathy for people who need to be a part of a tribe that is so lacking today in our country, as we've all split into these two tribes who are unwilling to really put themselves out there to understand what is behind the opinions and the actions of the other side. And so much of this is being championed by the man who has been our commander-in-chief, the man who will continue to be for the next 13 hours and 45 minutes. A man who, like, when he was elected president, I can't say I knew it would come to this, but I saw very early on that we were going to have a problem, even as I wanted to believe it would be otherwise. But I went to the inauguration in 2008 of Barack Obama, a jubilant, joyous affair, people clamoring on top of porta-johns just to get a better view of what was going on. And then I went in 2016 to the inauguration of Donald Trump, because I believe it is important to participate in the most American of rituals, which is the peaceful transfer of power. And of course, it was a very different affair altogether. No surprise, Washington, D.C. is the most democratic, supportive city in America. So suddenly you have Donald Trump and his people coming to throw a party in a city that is in a state of shock and dismay at what they've just witnessed in this election. And so the crowds were so much less. And it was a real indication to me, that very first press conference where his press secretary had to come out and just lie to us about the size of the inauguration crowds. And there are many lies that have been told by this administration, but this was one, the only one I've been able to see with my own eyes, the difference between the crowds. And it was so much smaller for Donald Trump. And why? Why the need to lie about this? And no surprise they were smaller. It's Washington, D.C. People aren't excited this is happening. And I saw right then, I was like, oh, this is a man who can admit to no failure, and as such does not have an ounce of empathy. And it's too bad for him, because he could have won re-election if he had just owned up to a failure or two and examined them and thereby gained empathy, like gotten something he needed. I watched that inauguration on the mall with the Capitol building far off, an inauguration that's going to happen at noon tomorrow. And no one can go onto the mall. There's 25,000 troops. Even if there wasn't a coronavirus, you can't go there. And that is fully a result of a man who's been leading this country, who cannot own up to failure, who has no empathy. And as the keys to the White House were passed over from Barack Obama to Donald Trump 4 years ago, Donald Trump had just finished his speech in which he decried American carnage, though as it's turned out, it was really a prescription for American carnage. And then the ritual is that, like, the new occupants of the White House walk the old occupants outside to the Air Force One helicopter that then literally will fly Barack and Michelle Obama out of Washington, D.C. A moment that we could see happening far off in the Capitol, but of course we could also see close up on a Jumbotron right in front of myself and Vanessa, my wife. And I would like to know who was in charge of DJing this moment, because the speeches were done and it's about a 15-minute transfer between the end of the speech and the walk to the helicopter. And the songs that were chosen in this interlude, they're not for nothing. You know, they can't help but have extra significance as we're watching this incredible thing happening in front of us, because it is incredible, this transfer of power, you know. And there were 5 songs played, and I wish I could remember all 5. I don't remember one of them, but 4 of them I remember. One was Rocket Man by Elton John, and you're like, oh, okay, you know, I guess that has some significance. He's taking off in a helicopter going up in the sky. One was by some boy band. It's that song, Tell Me Why Can't... You're like, what? Who's playing that, you know? But you're also thinking, like, yeah, tell me why this is happening. Another song was by Aerosmith, a song called Living on the Edge, which starts off with the lyrics, there's something wrong in the world today, but I don't know what it is. And maybe it's that the world's spinning faster or slower. It's going to spin right apart. And the last song, of course, the last song as the helicopter took off and took Barack away was by the Rolling Stones. The song, You Can't Always Get What You Want, which I understand has been played at some rallies for Donald Trump, and so I suppose it was his DJ on the decks who chose that song. And I wish for Donald Trump's own sake, and as such for ours, that he had really taken these lyrics in, because maybe, you know, we wouldn't be in the state right now. The lyrics to that song being, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Thanks for listening to this show, this January iteration of Right Now. It's been a pleasure, chilly or not, to be able to speak to whoever is listening out there. If you enjoyed this show, consider making a donation. As a performing artist, this now is my only means of income. But if you're not able to, then just fine. Just send me a note if you enjoyed it, and I'd love to connect with anybody out there. More than this, just thank you so much to everyone, and I hope we all stay safe. Things are just as hairy as ever, and as we move into this new transition, this new administration tomorrow, I will try, and everyone try, to have some sort of empathy, not necessarily for the man who has none, but for the people who have been in his sway, and try to understand why. Thank you very much. I'm going to fade to black here. Understand I'm still sitting here, and you're still sitting there, and I'll see you in another 5 to 6 weeks when hopefully I'll do this again. Thank you very much, and have a great night.